horrifying discovery for the men called to clean the septic tank at 2418 68th Street South. The skeletal remains of a child and his little cowboy boots.
And my hose got stuck, and I pulled it out, and there was bones, rib bones, and all that kind of stuff on it. Well, I was all right until I seen the little boots, and the cowboy boots, and that took me out of it.
The tank was sealed. Detectives do not think the child could have fallen in, and they're treating it as a homicide. They're not saying who the victim could be, but neighbor Ruby Howell remembers a 3-year-old boy named Matthew Alred who disappeared from this street at dusk nearly 19 years ago, on January 27, 1974.
They said that there was an ice cream truck along here, and the little boy had on short pants and was following the ice cream truck. And then he came up missing.
What was he wearing on his feet, do you remember?
Little boots, they said. A dress cowboy style. Said he had a little hat.
Neighbors say the Alred's home has been torn down, but it used to be right across the street from where the body was found, over here, in what's now a vacant lot. Newspaper articles confirm little 40-pound blonde Matthew Alred was wearing cowboy boots when he disappeared, and he tried to flag down an ice cream truck. The boy vanished at dusk, playing with his brothers. 400 volunteers searched for him. They combed the area near the home 8 times and found nothing. In fact, the body might never have been found if a real estate agent had not decided to get the septic tank cleaned in order to prepare this vacant house for sale.
I just can't imagine anybody doing that to a kid. It's unreal.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Pastime Mysteries. Today's episode will be covering the case of Matthew Allen Alred. Matthew was only 3 years old at the time of his disappearance, and his remains were suspiciously found 19 years later, just hidden across the street. What happened to little Matthew? Let's get into it. Matthew Allen Alred was born to Vernon and Virginia Alred on May 26, 1971, in Bradenton, Florida. In January 1974, the Alreds resided in a small, close-knit neighborhood in Claremelle City, a hamlet about 7 miles east of Tampa. Vernon, a Korean War veteran, worked as a truck driver for a local trucking company, while Virginia stayed at home to care for their 4 children: Cindy, who was 12, Gregory, who was 7, Terry, who was 4, and Matthew, who was almost 3 years old. Matthew was a lively, extroverted boy who approached and hugged strangers. He enjoyed playing with his older siblings and was often spotted outside riding his favorite toy, a tiny dune buggy. The family got along well with their neighbors, especially Reynaldo and Mary Pais, an elderly couple who lived directly across the street. Cindy would frequently take Matthew to the Pais' home to ride their ponies, and he would play with Reynaldo's tools while he worked in the backyard. Vernon purchased a pair of brown suede cowboy boots for Matthew around a week before his disappearance. They were a little too big for him, but he quickly fell in love. He adored them so much that he would wear them all day, every day, and scream when he had to remove them at night. Virginia would tuck him in and place the boots at the end of the bed, saying that they'd be there for him in the morning. On January 27th, 1974, it was a pleasant, breezy Sunday in Claremelle City. The Alred children spent the majority of the day outside, playing with the other neighborhood kids and taking turns on a new swing Vernon had hung to a tree in their backyard, before heading home in the late afternoon to join their parents and paternal aunt for supper. Cindy, Terry, and Gregory returned to the outdoor area to play after dinner. As his siblings ran out the door, Matthew fidgeted and said, "I want to get down." Virginia took him out of his high chair and watched him run out the door in his cowboy boots. When he arrived in the front yard, Cindy urged him to go play in the backyard while the older kids climbed a tree, so he turned and scampered to the swings behind their house. It was around 5:15 p.m. Virginia finished cleaning the table and went outside to wait for Vernon, who had gone out to tow a trailer into the yard. She discovered Matthew was missing and asked his brothers and sister where he was, but Cindy could only recall seeing him run around the swings. They hadn't noticed he was missing. Virginia and her sister-in-law walked around the block, assuming he had simply gone too far from the backyard, expecting to see him coming towards them at any moment. When he didn't, they were anxious and hurried home, only to discover that Vernon had just returned from an errand. They drove around looking for him, while Vernon went in the yard and the cab of his truck, hoping that his son had simply tagged along without his knowledge. Vernon called the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office at 6 p.m. to report Matthew missing, then left with a neighbor to find an ice cream truck that had gone through the neighborhood minutes earlier. The youngsters were allowed to buy ice cream on occasion, and it's probable that he heard the familiar jingle during supper and left to find it. They followed up with the driver a few blocks away, who told them that a little boy like Matthew attempted to buy some ice cream from him, but was turned away due to a lack of funds. Word of Matthew's disappearance traveled rapidly, and by dusk, about 800 friends, neighbors, and police officers were combing through the palmetto thickets and tiny wooded areas in and around the Alred's neighborhood. The ice cream salesman circled the area many times, hoping that Matthew would hear the music and follow it home. The canal, placed within walking distance of their house, and the area's small ponds and water-filled sinkholes were of particular concern to the searchers, but they discovered no sign that he had drowned, or anything else for that matter. By the evening of January 29th, the sheriff's office had searched a 3-square-mile area surrounding the home 8 times with no success. They had also tracked down the small child who attempted to buy ice cream, who turned out to be another neighborhood kid. That evening, Sheriff Malcolm Beard announced the suspension of the official search, stating that they were convinced Matthew was not in the region, and that they no longer thought this was a simple example of a child wandering away from home. FBI agents from Tampa briefly joined the investigation, but they found no evidence that a crime had been committed. Despite detectives' belief that Matthew had been abducted, there was little to no evidence to work with, and the case quickly went cold. In September 1978, Suncoast Crime Watch Inc. aired a 60-second commercial depicting Matthew's disappearance. It reported that investigators assumed the youngster walked along a fence line west of his home, but any tips resulting from the commercial did not lead to Matthew's location. It would stay this way for another 14 years, until on June 4th, 1990, Raymond Reynaldo Paez, the family's lifelong friend and neighbor, died at the age of 73. The one-story home he had previously occupied with his wife and 3 children stayed abandoned until late 1992, when his daughter began making plans to sell it. As part of the regular sale preparations, her real estate agent hired a local business to clean up the septic tank in the backyard dot. On the morning of December 31st, 1992, 19-year-old Timothy Scanlon went to the former Paez residence to begin cleaning the 900-gallon septic tank for the first time in almost 20 years. When he shattered the concrete seal on the other intake and removed the lid, he discovered a small, round object partially immersed in the mud. Timothy went to work, thinking it was simply a coconut, and started pumping the septic tank. Minutes later, his hose became clogged. Timothy paused to clear the impediment, only to find a little jawbone, ribs, pelvic, and leg bones. At that point, he understood the coconut he had seen before was a human skull. He frantically contacted his father, the company's owner, who arrived at the Paez residence and began hosing down some of the objects Timothy had collected. One of them was a little pointed cowboy boot. Police sifted through hundreds of gallons of waste by hand and recovered more bones, a flashlight, another boot, and tags from children's clothing. They immediately knew that the remains probably belonged to Matthew Alred, the little boy who lived just across the street, and they were certain the location was no accident. The tank was buried underground, and both inlets had been covered with a lid and sealed with concrete, making it impossible for a small child to accidentally fall in. They found that someone had broken the concrete seal of the second inlet and subsequently covered it with dirt and glass, but they could not say for sure when it was broken or whether the perpetrator had placed Matthew's body through that opening. Although officials were unable to test the bones for DNA, Vernon's suspicions about the skeleton's identification vanished as soon as he saw the child-sized footwear. Quote, "I had not seen them since then until today," unquote, Vernon remarked. Quote, "It's a positive ID as far as I'm concerned, because them's the same boots I bought him just before he came up missing." On January 13th, 1993, Matthew's death was deemed a homicide by undetermined means. According to Robert Pfaltzgraff of the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office, the ruling was based on the fact that someone had definitely attempted to conceal his death, rather than any injuries to the bones, which were not discovered. Quote, "The kid could not have put himself in there," claimed Jack Espinosa, then information director for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. Quote, "Someone put him there. He was executed and then imprisoned. That is what we believe." Matthew's family was astounded to learn that he was discovered so near to home, much alone on their friend's land. Reynaldo, a 57-year-old retiree from the Tampa Bay region, lived with his wife Mary in 1974. Their grown children were married and presumably living elsewhere, and it is unknown if anyone was visiting or staying with them at the time Matthew went missing. Reynaldo was a kind, good-natured family man who enjoyed having the neighboring kids play on his land and adored Matthew, but he rarely visited without Cindy. Mary was constantly there at the Alred home to console and support Virginia in the days following the child's disappearance. Vernon praised the Pais family in an interview with the Tampa Times 4 days after he went missing, stating, quote, "Matt considered them tops, and Pais looked on him as a grandson," he declared. "He would let Matt and Cindy ride his ponies anytime," unquote. Nevertheless, authorities informed Vernon that they had discovered evidence pointing to Reynaldo as the primary suspect in Matthew's death and disposal. It is unclear whether Reynaldo was ever considered a suspect before Matthew's bones were discovered on his land, and authorities have never publicly disclosed the information that led them to conclude he was guilty of Matthew's death. What possible reason could Reynaldo have had for murdering his neighbor's 3-year-old son? Was it an accident that he knew he'd be held accountable for if anyone found out? Or was it a premeditated murder? Did Mary also know what had happened? If she did, it's too late to ask her about it because she died in 1983. Finding Matthew provided little comfort to his family. Cindy had long dealt with emotions of guilt. Ralph Samuel, born just 8 months after his disappearance, never met his older brother. Vernon and Virginia tried to move on, even moving the family to Connecticut in 1980 to escape the negative memories. But they were troubled by unanswered questions and hoped that he would come up at their door one day as an adult, eager to learn more about his beginnings. Quote, "I've lived with that 24 hours a day," Vernon explained in 1993. Imagine having a child and suddenly losing him. It just makes you crazy." Unquote. Matthew's family conducted a memorial service for him on January 16, 1993, almost precisely 19 years after he was last seen playing in the backyard of his Claremelle City home. They also intended to have the cowboy boots bronzed as a remembrance of the joyful, blonde little kid who was taken from them for reasons they will never know. Quote, "I'm glad it's over," Cindy said. "We don't have to wonder where he is anymore. All we can do now is go on. We can't stop time. We can't wonder how it could have been." Unquote. Thanks for watching another episode of Pastime Mysteries. As always, if you enjoyed, leave a like and let me know what cases you would like to see covered next.